In the natural world, certain parasites ensure their survival by attaching to a healthy host, quietly siphoning off its resources long before the host realizes it has been compromised. Human social structures rely on a similar, though usually benign, exchange of energy. Normal human interaction is a system built entirely on healthy influence, persuasion, and negotiation. We routinely ask things of each other. This normative influence works because it relies on transparent communication and mutual benefit. Everyone understands the terms of the exchange. We can visualize this healthy baseline here, with two network nodes exchanging balanced, bidirectional data packets. Information and resources flow freely in both directions. Influence crosses the line into manipulation when transparency is removed. Watch how one node systematically alters its output to slip past the other's defensive perimeter. The manipulator exploits a cognitive or emotional vulnerability to force an asymmetric, one-way flow of resources. Behavioral scientists categorize this specific systemic deviation as dark psychology. It is highly effective because it weaponizes ordinary human traits. Manipulators use our natural inclination toward empathy, our desire for reciprocity, and our capacity for guilt as tools to pry open our defenses. While these tactics often yield immediate results for the manipulator, the extraction cannot be sustained. Eventually, the target recognizes the deception, leading to the total erosion of trust and the collapse of the relationship. To defend against this type of coercive control, we have to stop treating these interactions as isolated arguments and start mapping their underlying architecture. Manipulation is a calculated behavioral algorithm. By identifying how the code is written, you can build a structural defense to protect your cognitive autonomy. Manipulative behavior exists on a sliding scale, dictated by intent and severity. At the lower end of the spectrum are immature or entitled individuals. They often use toxic behavior as a learned survival mechanism to get their way, acting out of selfishness rather than malicious forethought. The extreme end of the spectrum operates very differently. Here, control is premeditated, pathological, and highly destructive. Clinical psychologists classify this pathological manipulation under three distinct pillars: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy. Together, they form the dark triad. Narcissism manifests as an obsession with grandiosity. In leadership or interpersonal dynamics, the narcissist prioritizes their own ego and need for validation over team cohesion. Machiavellianism describes the deployment of strategic long-term deceit. These individuals exploit others through calculated planning, driven strictly by the pursuit of money, power, or personal advantage. Psychopathy is characterized by cold calculation and a complete disregard for human emotion. Psychopathic individuals act ruthlessly, entirely devoid of empathy or remorse. Individuals possessing dark triad traits view interpersonal dynamics not as human connections, but as zero-sum dominance games to be won at all costs. Understanding the profile of a manipulator is only the first step. To defend yourself, you must recognize the specific tactical algorithms they run to erode a target's reality. Manipulators use a stimulus-response feedback loop. They input provocation, the target outputs defensiveness. Love bombing floods positive input, building dependency. Gaslighting then scrambles data, distorting events to compromise logic. Finally, triangulation routes data through third parties, manufacturing jealousy to isolate the target. If the target attempts to confront the behavior, manipulators deploy DARVO, deny, attack, and reverse victim and offender. They reject the accusation, attack the target's credibility, and claim they are the actual victim, avoiding all accountability. In the real world, these algorithms manifest as observable behavioral patterns. This table categorizes universal red flags across personal and professional environments. Notice the overlaps. Isolating team members mirrors discouraging family visits. Shifting roles at work mirrors intense withdrawing behavior at home. These red flags do not resolve on their own. They systematically escalate. Over time, the target is forced to constantly adjust their own behavior to avoid punishment, living in a chronic state of walking on eggshells. Recognizing these structural red flags early is the only reliable method for detecting a psychological exploit before your autonomy is fully compromised. Applying logic or emotion to resolve a conflict with a manipulator is like injecting pure oxygen into a chemical fire. The reaction violently accelerates. A common misconception in professional and personal disputes is the assumption that you can out-logic, out-argue, or establish reasonable verbal boundaries with a pathological manipulator. In our stimulus-response loop, the target desperately returns logic and defense data back to the manipulator. Instead of processing the logic, the manipulator's system immediately absorbs this defensive data and converts it into a larger provocation signal. The cycle speeds up. The target's defensiveness is the exact emotional supply the manipulator requires. It validates their power and confirms they have successfully controlled the target's state of mind. Emotional appeals for fairness rely on shared humanity. They will always fail against an entity designed to operate without empathy. Trapped in this endless cycle of provocation and defense, the victim inevitably experiences severe burnout, confusion, and psychological exhaustion. To survive the interaction, the target must abandon their reactive emotional stance and implement a proactive structural defense. In behavioral psychology, this is achieved through behavioral extinction. If you systematically remove the reward, the behavior eventually dies out. You cannot reason with a broken algorithm. You can only disconnect it from its power source. The practical, real-world application of behavioral extinction is known as the greyrockmethod. When the target receives a hostile provocation packet, it no longer returns a reactive signal. It simply turns solid gray. The output line now reads null data. Providing nothing to process breaks the manipulator's feedback loop, forcing the system to power down. Maintaining this defense requires strict execution. This checklist outlines the required protocols. Interactions must be brief, factual, emotionally neutral, and utilize zero disclosure. The first protocol mandates drastically limiting the disclosure of any personal information. If you do not provide details about your life, the manipulator has no ammunition to use against you later. The second protocol dictates that all necessary communication must be brief and strictly focused on logistics. It must be entirely devoid of emotional framing. You must maintain a monotone voice, keep facial expressions flat, and avoid prolonged eye contact. You are signaling that there is no energy to be extracted. For situations where a manipulator launches a direct verbal attack, you can use a specialized tool called fogging. Fogging involves calmly acknowledging a critique without defending yourself against it. If someone claims you are always late, you agree that you were late today. You deny the attacker the conflict they are desperately trying to start. Imagine a heavy stone thrown into a thick bank of fog. The attack is absorbed entirely, disappearing without a sound, generating zero reactive force. By consistently applying the greyrockmethod and fogging techniques, the manipulator finds the target entirely unrewarding. Denied their emotional supply, they are forced to disengage and seek it elsewhere. True resilience against dark psychology is not achieved by winning the argument. It is achieved by refusing to participate in the algorithm, preserving your behavioral and psychological autonomy in the process.